Hello everyone, this is a quick video on basic lighting in Blender so that you can get your diorama projects lit and rendered and looking pretty good. So that since this is our first major project, this assumes you don't have much lighting practice. So we're just going to kind of cover the basics, add some lights, add a camera, and then just render out some images. Um, from here, once you get more comfortable, of course you can do more with the rendering. You can do more realistic rendering, more realistic lighting. You can even do some compositing to get really, really high-end looking stuff. But for now, we're just going to stick to the basics just to get something out and see how you feel from here. Um, again, this is just the basics, but hopefully this will make your dioramas look pretty nice. Even with basic lighting, you can get some nice looking stuff. So here I have a scene with just a couple of primitives, some cubes and cylinders, as you can see. And I made a couple of them in materials with various degrees of shininess and color, just to kind of show you how the lights might look once we get them in there and the rendering. Um, this will look even better on your projects since you all will have really detailed models and interesting materials and colors and things like that. One thing I do recommend and make sure you keep in mind that your materials have, reflectivity and roughness, and if it's metal, have, turn on the metallic, just so you, let's see, just to show you here, we have metallic, we have some roughness, some same here. Just make sure you have something on these so that it looks really nice with the lighting, and like the variations in colors and reflections and bouncing and things like that is what really sells a good scene. So that said, let's just get into it. So even when you have a basic scene and you have some materials, these are the different, if you kind of like hold your mouse over here in the top right hand corner, you can kind of see you have these different viewport shading models. And you can just kind of like see what they look like in the different ones. So this one is just a really basic rendering. And if you click on the settings, it uses a HDRI to kind of light the scene. And it actually looks pretty good, just like this. You can actually change these if you want your environment to look different. And you can bring in your own. We don't have time to cover that here because we're just doing basic lighting, but you can always search and find a really quick, there's tons of really quick videos or tutorials on how to bring in your own HDRI for lighting. It actually looks pretty decent just doing that because you get some environmental reflections, and you get some really basic like ambient lighting. The only problem with this is that we don't have any shadows and we don't have any kind of like direct lighting or anything like that. That's important, especially to, I guess, tell a story or to make your scene look like it's in a particular place. So we're gonna go ahead and do our own lighting. So there's a couple methods you can use. You can do your own lighting and just do everything yourself, or you can kind of use this as like kind of an ambient light setting and then kind of combine it with your own. So let's try that first. So I'm going to go to add light and then I'll just add a sun. So a sun is just sort of like an infinite directional light, and it just kind of shines light in this direction. You can see the trajectory, and that's what it does. So it's good for a direct light source, especially if you're doing like an outdoor scene. The sunlight will shine in a direction. It doesn't really matter where it is. It matters what direction. So there's the sun. I'm going to come down. So there's the color. I'm going to add a little bit of warmness to it since it's an outdoor light. And then the strength. But you can see when I'm doing this, like nothing's really happening. It kind of changes a little bit. So if I put it on 2, it does some work, but it's not really doing a whole lot. I'm going to come up to my render settings and bring the strength of my little HDR image down. So that provides some ambient light. but I want the sun to do most of the work. So now you can see it looks much different. Since I turned down the ambient light, the shadows are starting to show up. You can see now it has some shadows. It's still pretty dark. You can increase the strength of your sun, and you can see getting some more of a direct light in there. Bring the strength up a tiny bit. So that already looks a little better because we have a more direct lighting source and we have some nice shadows. And that's it. I mean, this is lighting. Just throw some lights in. This is like a really, really base level. Like you don't really know what's going on, but you want to try something. This is a good place to start here. So I did make this material, which is supposed to be like it's supposed to be like glowing blue. And I also wanted this to be a light source. So I'm going to add another kind of light. So I'm going to add light and then maybe a point light. And let's put it in the middle of the light of this sphere, which doesn't look very good. So I'm going to the light settings here. I'm going to turn this to blue. I'll just eyeball it. I think it was like some kind of blue. Doesn't really matter. This is just, let's crank this way up like 1,000. Still not doing much. Let's turn the shadow off. There we go. That's probably the sphere is shadowing it. So now I have this kind of like glowing light source. Although it doesn't really look like it's glowing, but we can fix that as well. So let's go to the render settings. So by default, my render setting shows Eevee. So you have Eevee and cycles. Eevee is kind of, I don't know, I'm more of like a game kind of person. I work a lot in real-time lighting and game engines, so I'm not really sure exactly how the lighting engines in Blender work under the hood. My impression is Eevee seems to be more real-time. It looks more like a real-time light would in a game. It seems to be render faster and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Cycles is more realistic and it has like ray tracing and all that realistic stuff in it. So we're just going to stick to this first. So a couple of settings, ambient inclusion, turn that on. That gives you some ambient shadows. It's very subtle, but you can see the changes where, like look at the bottom of this object here. You can see it kind of adds some ambient lighting where objects meet each other, kind of like some shadows there. And you can adjust the distance and the factor of that if you want to. Bloom gives a nice kind of glow effect. This is something that was heavily used in the game industry back in the day. It was kind of like a, actually I kind of liked it blue because it kind of made that light look good. Back in like the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 era days, they would use a lot of bloom on everything. It's kind of like a defining visual attribute of that era of rendering, I guess. But it does, add some glowiness. You can play with the bloom. And then depth of field is, you can do like your camera can focus on a particular area and then the rest is kind of out of focus, depth of field. So, adding lights, playing with the render settings, and that's pretty much it at a very basic level. You can use this for your ambient lighting, and then you can get pretty far doing this, right? If you like this, you can render it, obviously. So if you go down here, these are your output properties, it's called. So this is what's going to output your render. So for example, by default, my render image is set to 1920 by 1080. You can change that if you want a larger image or if you want an image at a different aspect ratio. We don't have any animations, but if we did, you could set the frame range. And then this is where it's going to save your image. So by default, it saves it in this temp folder, but you can click here and you can change where you actually want it to save on your computer if you want to save the images in a particular spot. And then you can change the file format and so on. So I'm just going to keep it like basic for now. And then you need a camera. So let's go to add camera. And then there's your camera. So by default, where's my camera? You can see it just kind of throws the camera in the scene, which isn't very helpful. If I were to go to view and hang on, view, viewport camera, there we go. It would just be looking into nothingness. So let's change that. Let's go. Yeah, if you just kind of like orbit out of that, it'll by default pull you out. So the way you can set up your camera is find kind of like a angle that you like in your scene. Then you can go to view, align active camera to view, and that'll align your camera to your view. It's gonna look different because if you have your camera selected and you come down to camera settings, the camera is set up differently than like your viewport is. So you can play with your field of view. So if you're trying to match like, I usually switch it to field of view because I will try to match games. So for example, I think like a pretty standard field of view for a game is like 90. And you can kind of try to match that. Or you can do millimeters if you want to do match like more camera settings, like actual camera settings. So I'm going to go back to my camera. And these do have, you can see these have shortcut keys if you want to use those, but I'm using the menu just to show you where they are. So go back to camera. You can also go to view and you can lock camera to viewport. So now you can see I'm still in my camera and I can kind of move my viewport around and still kind of keep the camera in view. I mean, keep the, how do you say this? I can keep the camera moving with the viewport so I don't have to go back and forth if you're trying to like, you know, set up like a view. Obviously, yeah, and if I take that off, I can kind of orbit out of the camera. Also, you can have multiple cameras if you want multiple angles to render from and so on. So actually, let's turn on depth of field and let's do that. My scene isn't very big, so I don't know if this will make much of a difference. Yeah, it does a little bit. But so depth of field, you can sort of focus on an object, and then you can play with the camera settings if you want to. So like the f-stop, all this other stuff, that's up to you. So once you have your camera settings, you have some lights. To render, all you have to do, remember this is our render settings here, you just go to render image. So you can go to rendering. Actually, let's just keep it here and just go to render image, and it'll pop up a render of your image. So here's a render, and I have, you can see it has like the field of view on there, which looks pretty cool. It has the reflectivity and all the material stuff ready to go. So this is like really basic rendering, just using almost default settings, and you get something that looks pretty decent. Obviously from here you can do more. You can add more lights. You can do more camera settings. You can switch to cycles. And then I'm going to go to this view here, which will give you a live preview of that. And you can see things look a lot different. So it's using only my lights now. You can add your own HDRI kind of lighting scenario as you did in this view. You would have to edit the world material. If you want to do that, you can do that. There's tons of quick tutorials and show you how to do that. Um, but right now it's just kind of using this color as like my ambient, as you can see. Um, but yeah, you can edit that if you want to. But anyway, so that aside, you can see my son is doing a lot of work. You can see when I'm kind of moving my camera, it looks like pixelated. That's because I have to calculate and get the samples. The lighting here is much more substantial, so it requires more resources. If you go to your render settings, when you switch it to cycle, if you have a graphics card, do GPU compute. You can also go to preferences, system, and make sure you're using your rendered GPU. And yeah, so that's basic lighting here. If I were to render from here, you can see the difference. It takes much longer too. It's not instant like the other one is. So you can see my samples are going up. So this is gathering, yeah. Actually, I'm not 100% sure how it works under the hood, but um, I know that when you have the samples, yeah, there it goes. Actually, that's pretty quick. Um, if you have a less powerful machine, you might want to lower the samples. So my max samples is 4096. You can obviously take it down if it takes a long time to gather the pixel information and smooth them out and calculate the light bounces and all that stuff. But you can get pretty far with just Eevee. Actually, in here my blue light gets washed out pretty hard. Let's go to the light settings, bring this down. And then maybe go to the point light. Yeah, I don't use, actually don't use, oh, take that off. There we go. Take the cast shadow off so it can shine through the sphere. And then let's do a render. And there it goes. So you can see it does look more realistic here. The depth of field looks nice. You get all of the reflections and stuff. So it's up to you how you want to render and light this. It's not that, it's pretty basic. You have cameras, camera settings, you have lights, light settings. You have cycles, which is high-end rendering, and then Eevee, which is like more faster, kind of more akin to a real-time lighting. And either one works fine. I know a lot of you are using your own personal laptops that might not have good video cards. In that case, Eevee might be the way to go. If you're using the computers on campus can definitely handle some good cycles renders. So just play with those and see what works best for your diorama. So that's all I have. Hopefully this helps you get some good lighting in there. Just kind of like be cognizant of what kind of scene you have. For example, if it's a nighttime scene, you probably don't want a, oh yeah, switches to workbench for some reason. I don't know why I did that. If you have a nighttime scene, you might not want a strong sun. Have additional light sources in there to make it look interesting. Lamps and lights and glowing things is always fun. It's always good to define your key light source. Like, where's your main light coming from? Is it coming from a window? Is it the sun? Is it if it's an interior? What are those light sources? Put the lights in those places. Have them shine from those places to get kind of a more realistic look. So really think about the light and where the light's coming from with this project. And after that, it's relatively easy to get a good render out. And that is actually all I have. I know I said that before, but this is all I have. Looking forward to seeing the projects, and let me know if you have any questions.